Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening, the kind that quietly fades into routine without leaving a trace. I remember the soft sound of the door opening, the familiar presence of my husband stepping inside, and the way he looked at me that night, different, almost uncertain, like he was carrying a secret too heavy to say out loud. But nothing could have prepared me for who he brought home with him. The stranger stood just behind him, calm, confident, and strangely polite. A man I had never seen before, yet somehow, the atmosphere shifted the moment he stepped inside our home. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But something unspoken began to form in the silence between us. My husband introduced him casually, like it was normal, like it didn't change the air in the room. But it did. That night, even simple things felt different. The way we spoke. The way we avoided each other's eyes for a second too long. And the way I caught myself noticing things I shouldn't have, small gestures, quiet smiles, moments that lingered just a little too deeply. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't understand, something between trust, curiosity, and emotional confusion. Later, when another couple arrived, the atmosphere grew even heavier with unspoken tension. Conversations overlapped with pauses that meant more than words ever could. Smiles felt intentional. Glances felt charged. It was as if invisible lines were being crossed without anyone daring to admit it. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just social. Just harmless. Just a gathering of adults in the same space. But deep down, I could feel it, the shift, the pull, the quiet emotional storm building under every glance. And then my husband did something I never expected. Something that made my heart stop for a moment, and made me question everything I thought I understood about us, about trust, and about what was about to happen next. Because in that single moment, I realized this night was not going to end the way it began. And I wasn't ready for the truth that was about to unfold. The room didn't feel the same anymore after that introduction. At first, everyone tried to act normal. Conversations restarted in soft, careful tones, small talk about work, travel, and everyday things that usually fill the silence between strangers. But beneath every sentence, there was something else growing. Something unspoken. Something that made even the simplest smile feel heavier than it should have. I noticed my husband watching me more than usual that night. Not in a possessive way, but like he was observing something he himself had set in motion. He sat closer to the guest than before, speaking casually, almost comfortably, as if they shared a history I didn't know about. And yet, every few seconds, his eyes would drift back to me, checking my reaction, reading my silence. The guest, on the other hand, remained calm. Too calm. He spoke gently, respectfully, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. When our eyes met, even briefly, I felt an unexpected pause in my chest, like my thoughts forgot their direction for a second too long. I quickly looked away, but the awareness stayed. As the evening went on, another couple joined us, and the energy shifted again. The living room felt smaller somehow, like everyone had stepped into a shared space of unspoken understanding. Laughter came easier now, but it didn't erase the tension. It layered over it, making everything feel more complicated. I found myself sitting slightly apart, watching the interactions unfold. My husband leaned in closer during conversations, his voice lower, more intentional. The guest responded in the same tone, and between them, something subtle formed, a rhythm of agreement, of understanding I wasn't fully part of yet. And yet, I wasn't completely outside it either. There were moments I caught myself included in the conversation without being directly addressed. A glance. A pause waiting for my reaction. A question that felt simple but carried weight beneath it. It was confusing, and strangely unsettling. At one point, I stood up to step into the kitchen. I needed space. Just a moment to breathe away from whatever this was becoming. But as I passed behind them, the conversation stopped for half a second. Just enough for me to notice. Just enough for me to feel it. When I reached the kitchen counter, I paused, gripping the edge lightly. My reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar, like I was standing on the edge of a moment I couldn't step back from. And then I heard footsteps approaching behind me. Slow. Intentional. And I didn't turn around immediately. Because something inside me already knew. This was the moment where everything was about to shift again. I didn't move right away. The footsteps behind me stopped just a few steps away, and for a second, the kitchen felt completely still, like even the air was waiting for something to happen. I could feel someone there without turning around. The awareness alone was enough to make my thoughts scatter. You needed space, a calm voice said. It wasn't my husband. It was him, the guest. I slowly turned, pretending I wasn't affected, but my heart betrayed me anyway. He stood near the doorway, hands relaxed, posture steady. There was nothing aggressive in his presence, and yet it felt like he had stepped into a space I had emotionally abandoned just seconds ago. I just wanted a moment, I replied quietly. He nodded like he understood more than I said. That was the strange part, he often did. Back in the living room, laughter continued faintly, but it felt distant now. Separate. Like a different world. Here, in the kitchen, everything felt more personal. Smaller. More real. I noticed you've been quiet tonight, he said after a pause. I'm just not used to this kind of gathering, I answered carefully. A faint smile crossed his face, not mocking, just observant. Neither is your husband, he said, almost thoughtfully. That line stayed in the air longer than it should have. Because it wasn't just a comment, it felt like an insight. Before I could respond, my husband appeared at the doorway too. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes moved between us in a way that made my chest tighten. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something more complicated. Like he was watching a decision unfold that he had already begun. You two okay? He asked casually. Yes, I answered quickly. But the guest didn't answer immediately. That silence changed everything. In the living room, one of the other couples had begun sharing personal stories, laughing softly about past relationships, misunderstandings, emotional mistakes. It was harmless on the surface, but it added another layer to the night. A reminder that everyone here carried history, and hidden feelings they didn't always speak about. When I returned to the room, I felt it immediately, the shift. My husband was sitting slightly closer to the guest now. Too close to ignore. Their conversation was lower, more private, interrupted by occasional glances in my direction. It wasn't obvious enough for others to notice, but I noticed everything. And the worst part? I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. At one point, the guest looked at me across the room and said something simple, just a question about my opinion, but it felt different coming from him. Personal. Direct. Almost like he was pulling me into their conversation instead of including me. My husband didn't interrupt. He let it happen. And in that moment, I realized. This wasn't accidental anymore. Something was being allowed to unfold, slowly, carefully. And I didn't know who was guiding it. Or what the final boundary was going to be when we finally reached it. But I could feel it getting closer. Too close to ignore, the rest of the evening didn't feel like an evening anymore. It felt like time had slowed down just enough for me to notice everything I was trying to ignore. Every conversation in the room now carried a different weight. Even the laughter sounded distant, like it belonged to another version of us that wasn't standing here tonight. My husband was still talking, still smiling at the others, but I could feel his attention drifting back to me again and again, like he was balancing something delicate that no one else could see. And the guest, he wasn't avoiding me anymore. He was aware of me in a way that made it harder to pretend otherwise. When I spoke, he listened too closely. When I looked away, I could still feel his gaze lingering a second too long. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was constant, like an invisible thread stretching between us, tightening every time we tried to act normal. At some point, the other couple suggested moving closer together on the sofa, rearranging the seating in a way that made everything feel even more connected. What seemed like a simple social shift somehow changed the entire structure of the room. Now, there was no real distance left to hide behind. I ended up seated between silence and conversation, caught in the middle of everything I didn't fully understand. My husband leaned forward, speaking softly to the guest again, and I caught a phrase I wasn't meant to hear clearly. Something about trust, something about comfort, something that made the guest nod slowly without hesitation. And then, for a brief second, both of them looked at me. Not in a way that asked permission. In a way that waited. My breath felt shallow as I looked down at my hands, suddenly aware of how still I had become. The room wasn't chaotic, it was too controlled, too carefully balanced, like everyone was aware that one wrong movement could change everything. The guest shifted slightly closer when speaking to me directly this time. "You've been quiet again," he said gently. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About leaving?" he asked, not teasing, just observing. That question hit differently. Because I wasn't sure what the answer was anymore. My husband didn't interrupt. He just watched me carefully, like he already knew I was standing at the edge of a decision I hadn't spoken out loud. The air between us all felt thinner now. Every pause stretched longer. Every glance felt heavier. Even the space on the sofa seemed smaller than it should have been. And when I finally looked up again, I realized something that made my pulse tighten. No one was stepping back. If anything, we were all slowly moving closer without realizing it. Like the night itself had started pulling us into a moment none of us were ready to name. And the next choice was already forming in silence. The silence in the room didn't last long, but it changed everything. My husband was the first to break it. He stood up slowly, like he had already decided something before anyone else did. "I think we should step outside for a moment," he said calmly, looking around the room, but stopping briefly on me. That pause, it wasn't random. It felt like a signal. The guest followed him without hesitation. And for a second, I thought it would end there, just a normal conversation between them, away from the rest of us. But then my husband added something that made my stomach tighten. "You should come too," he said, looking directly at me. My breath caught slightly. It wasn't a request that felt casual. It felt intentional. Like I was being included in something I still didn't fully understand. Outside, the air was cooler, quieter. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for a moment, it almost felt normal again. But nothing about the way we stood together felt normal. The guests stood slightly closer than before. Not crossing a line, but standing at the edge of one. My husband was beside him, relaxed, almost too calm. And I was standing in the middle of something I couldn't name. That's when the second couple joined us. I didn't expect them to follow. But they did. And with their arrival, everything shifted again. Now it wasn't just three of us. It was a circle. A closed space of shared silence, unfinished thoughts, and emotions no one wanted to define out loud. The wife of the other couple smiled at me gently, but there was something in her expression I couldn't read, something knowing. Something like she understood the tension in the air better than she admitted. And then she said something quietly that changed the temperature of the entire night. "I think we've all been pretending this is just a normal evening," she said. No one laughed. No one denied it. My husband exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting for that exact sentence. The guest looked at me again, but this time, it wasn't just observation. It felt like recognition. Like we had both reached a point where pretending was no longer possible. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this," I admitted softly, almost without meaning to. My husband turned toward me. Neither agreeing nor correcting me. Just watching. The guest spoke again, his voice lower this time. "Some nights don't stay simple once they start changing direction." That line stayed in the air longer than anything else that night. Because it didn't feel like a comment. It felt like a threshold. And then, without warning, my husband did something that completely shifted the balance again. He stepped slightly aside, creating space between us, space that didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like invitation. And I realized in that moment. This wasn't just a gathering anymore. It was becoming a decision no one was openly making, but everyone was already part of. And the worst part? I could feel myself standing right at the edge of choosing something I might not be able to undo, that I thought the night would break in a loud, dramatic way. But it didn't. It broke quietly. My husband was the one who spoke first again, his voice steady but different now, lighter, as if a decision had already been made inside him long before we reached this moment. "We didn't bring you here by accident," he said, looking at me. The words landed slowly. Not sharp, but heavy. The guest didn't react immediately. Instead, he lowered his gaze for a second, like he was confirming something only he understood. Then he looked at me, not with tension, not with pressure, but with something calmer. Honest. And that honesty changed everything. My husband stepped closer, but not toward the guest this time, toward me. And when he spoke again, his tone softened. "I've seen how distant we've become," he admitted. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I needed to understand what's still real between us. My chest tightened. The guest finally spoke, quietly. He asked me to meet you both, not to interfere, but to help him see what he couldn't see alone. The words didn't feel like betrayal. They felt like truth finally being exposed. A silence followed that wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was reflective. Heavy, but honest. Even the other couple didn't interrupt. No one moved. It felt like the entire night had been leading to this single admission. My husband looked at me directly now. No games. No distance. Just him. "I wasn't trying to replace anything," he said softly. "I was trying to understand if we were already losing each other without realizing it." My breath slowed. And for the first time, I saw him not as someone controlling the situation, but someone afraid of losing something he didn't know how to fix. The guest took a step back. Creating space. Not tension. Closure. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. The emotional weight I had been carrying all night suddenly shifted. Not away from me, but into clarity. I wasn't being pulled between people anymore. I was being asked to choose honesty over assumption. But just as I thought the truth had settled, the second couple revealed something no one expected. They weren't just observers. They had been through something similar before, and this gathering wasn't random at all. It was part of a conversation my husband had quietly started long before tonight, one I was never told about. My heart dropped slightly. Because this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everything we hadn't been saying for a long time. And as I looked at my husband again, I realized. The real question tonight wasn't who crossed a line. It was whether we were finally ready to face what our silence had already created. And his next words would decide everything. The night didn't end the way I once feared it would. It ended with silence, but not the kind that feels empty anymore. After everything was finally said, the tension that had been building between all of us slowly softened into something quieter, more human. The second couple stayed for a little while longer, sharing small reflections about relationships, misunderstandings, and how easily people can drift apart when they stop speaking honestly. Their words didn't feel intrusive anymore, they felt like perspective. The guest eventually stepped back from the center of everything, not as someone who had changed our story, but as someone who had helped reveal it. Before leaving, he gave a simple nod, no drama, no lingering tension, just acknowledgement that his part in the night was complete. And strangely, I felt at peace with that. My husband and I didn't rush into perfect understanding. We didn't suddenly become something new. But for the first time in a long time, we spoke without hesitation. Real conversation. Real listening. Not assumptions, not silence pretending to be comfort. We walked away from that night with something fragile but real, clarity. Later, when we were finally alone again, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because we had. The same rooms, the same walls, but a quieter distance had disappeared between us. He didn't try to explain everything again. He didn't need to. Neither did I. Instead, we sat together in a calm that felt earned. Not perfect, not scripted, just honest. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized that sometimes relationships don't break in loud moments. They break in the silence no one talks about. And sometimes, they heal the same way, slowly, carefully, through truth that finally comes too late to ignore. There was no dramatic ending. Just understanding. And a decision, not to forget the night, but to learn from it. Because love, trust, and emotional intimacy aren't built in perfect moments, they're rebuilt in imperfect truths. And that night, as the city lights faded beyond our window, I finally understood something simple. We hadn't lost each other. We had just found our way back through honesty we were both afraid to say out loud.